I sure hate doing these, but after a full tilt kernel crash and a couple of borks along the way of trying to compensate for it while things were getting repaired, um, we ended up with no usable recordings for the second session of Zero, played at Spelens Hus. Starting with the previous session, it was the first time this group had reconvened to play physically together in quite a long time. And we used an open room in Spelens Hus rather than our usual little studio. And this time, the one that I'm have to talk about instead of show you, we convened actually in that small room, and it's really redone. I mean, when you finally get to see it, you're going to be impressed, I think, in comparison. And it's really nice in there. So we tried that out, and we're really happy with it. And who was there? Okay, so in the first session, we had Odin and Helma and Hannah and Nathan um, as the. Am I missing somebody? Feels like I'm missing somebody. Um, anyway, but the big point is that in the second session, Odin wasn't there and Max was. And after a little soul searching and kind of deciding what to do, ultimately Max took over Odin's character, who was the soldier. And so we basically picked up from there and ran a particularly solid session. And Zero showed off something that I'm very aggrieved that you don't get to see, which I have experienced several times in play with this game, and I think it's one of its sort of beautiful features because of how individualized it is every time it happens. It's something that the game encourages but doesn't dictate or tell you how to do it, and so it takes on its own meaning each time. And that is when these characters, which the text calls biomechs, basically heavily cyberized, modified humans, they have been divorced from the overall hive mind, which has Zero, the character, at its center. And the first session typically is a bit of a sort of a shell shock situation. And in the second one, they are dealing with the nuances of individual dialogue, something that the characters really haven't experienced before, and also with trying to assess threats or circumstances with their limited information. And several things happened this time, um, which are notable. One is when the characters discover or remember something that they did know how to do, but they didn't really ever use, which was verbal speech, so that it is auditory, and that it's in the air when someone says it, and who's ever in earshot can hear it, but it's not connecting telepathically. And another is that miscommunication is much more possible outside of the hive mind. Um, Miscommunication as opposed to disinformation. Miscommunication just is you're saying something and the other person just doesn't have the context or a whole bunch of eyes on it to assess from a variety of angles, and it gets stalled and has to figure out what on earth are you talking about, and also having different priorities. Briefly, the archivist and the technician were a bit on a voyage of discovery by combing through the what is to our eyes clearly a suborbital flight worthy craft, and they are sort of doping things out a little bit about it without finding out too much that their characters understand, but which become a little more coherent to the people playing. You end up with knowledge of, some ancient survival supplies, still in their foil wrappers, and built to last. So the old folding cots and stuff still work. The bodies of a couple of people that I pointed out seemed curiously, underdeveloped in terms of which to our eyes basically means they don't have much in the way of cybernetic augmentation. To the biomechs, they look anatomically incomplete. And a variety of other things that they kind of pick up about the past. Now, what's important about this game, especially in contrast to the science fiction pool game, which also features insectoid cyber mech kind of characters, this one, there is a great deal of information, dysfunction, intrinsic problems that the hive has, partly in its lack of knowledge about itself, partly due to the fact that any bureaucracy becomes dysfunctional in various different parts, papered over. That the survival function of the hive, which was tremendously effective for a very long time, and probably humans could not have survived without it, is now showing its own failures, its own inability to cope with new situations and stuff like that. So the distortion of information through time, the establishment of standard protocols that were just fine perhaps at the time, or were even jury-rigged at the time as a stopgap, have now become problems. Well, anyway, all that's going on with the hive itself, and the backstory of the hive, and the nature of Zero. All these things are not codified in the rule book. It is very explicit. You make this up. You're the game master. We've given you what it looks like now, and you have to come up with this because this is your science fiction. It's about, what you want this sort of imagery to be about. And I actually quite like that, and I have chosen this time what I have in mind. So encountering that, especially because the characters are so ill-equipped to grasp the tools in which to grasp this information, there's really no reason whatsoever to hide the information. What they do and don't manage to understand actually matters a lot. That's why there are roles. But it's not a matter of moving the goalposts away from them until such a time as you think it's right for them to know something. That's not. It's just lots of wherever they are, what kind of information can they get in this old abandoned part of the hive? There's a lot of information that's stored in ways or phrased in ways that don't make sense to our modern day archivist. But there's a lot of information there, and the character is clever. And what's going on with that technician and with that archivist is that they have decided that there is a backstory. They've realized there is a way, the archivist in particular, there is a history here. There are causes for the way the hive is, and what does it mean to have a hive before there was a hive? I mean, what does it mean to fly off the world? I mean, these things are just really interesting, and they want to know. The technician is a little more task-oriented, wants to know how to make this weird thing go. But neither of them want to go back to the hive. They reached agreement about this. Now, the drone and the soldier were in a very different situation. They're dealing with the grievously wounded other soldier, the one that did not detach from the hive. And in this open kind of, it's a hangar, an open hangar space with crappy lighting, if at all, and, roving dingoes and all sorts of other menaces. The soldier, now played by Max, wants to is scared of this soldier, and is scared of what they think of as this terrible glitch that the hive is, misperceiving them as enemies. And so, but doesn't want to kill this soldier. I mean, he's wounded him horribly, but really is kind of like, but I know his number. I can't kill. He's a hive member. I am too, aren't I? And so finally determines that he's going to use his teleporting ability to try to get the guy out of this hangar and back toward the other part of this underground complex where the hive is still active, and try to get this guy over there. The drone who is sort of shifting about for something to do, finds themselves aiding the soldier, or at least investigating what the soldier is doing to try to figure out what we're all supposed to do here. Where's my what have I got in my docket today? What do I do? And things go kind of interesting at this point. I am well aware that the dingoes, having been made cautious by the gunfire, now that the gunfire has died down, and now that individuals seem to be walking practically into their jaws for a midnight snack, are starting to deploy right in the shadows. And so the soldier's still oriented toward getting this soldier out of here. Now, it just so happens that this soldier, as my little sheet said, has a web gun, a thing that can actually capture something. Why he had a web gun, they don't know. I do. But he has this web gun, and Max's soldier is delighted. He's like, web gun. I can truss him up with this and, send him out there. No problem, except for the joys of the dice basically bork the whole thing. I mean, this is a soldier who's got, all the combat abilities, and the chances of a failure on this were quite small, and they were achieved. And and I'd even said, okay, this is a weapon that you're familiar with, but you haven't really been trained in it. I mean, it's not your weapon. It's not, it's not your thing, but you can use it with your full skills and stuff. You just never really messed with a web gun before. Just as color. I wasn't really making a big deal out of it. But that meant that when the gun basically goes off, I mean, it's clear. I mean, Max just without even really, nobody had any question about it. It was very much so how does this work? Kapunk. And of course, he's webbed up. And so they try to get out. Now, this is why I'm bringing up what is sort of a bit of just like bad roll black comedy, you would think, but it's more than that. Because now we have these two biomechs trying to figure out how to work together on something without the comforting blanket of thousands of minds and at least dozens in immediate contact with them to sort of cushion, shape, contextualize everything they do. Inform, compare, everything they do. So they're kind of on their own. And of course, the strength rolls don't work together. One has failed and one is succeeded. And we talk about it's like, two people trying to get a desk through a door, but they're confused on which way they're supposed to go. And so basically they're there wrestling over this webbing while the dingoes are sort of, creeping in. The soldier, makes his perception roll, and there's the eyes in the dark, and it's just not good. I mean, this whole situation is actually looking pretty dicey. It also so happens, I'm aware, that there are old robotic enemies of the hive, or their devices are around these things called seekers, which are basically flying grenades. And so seekers are present. A seeker at the moment is right here in the vicinity. Now, seekers are kind of stupid, and they just go after, organics. So, of a particular size, like a dingo, as well as a human. So there's a little chaos is brewing here. What's kind of interesting is that enough time has passed for the wounded soldier, to have become conscious, barely. Which means that's the one, actually, who perceived the dingoes and the seeker. So it's starting not to make sense here. Max's soldier saw the dingoes. This soldier actually spots the seeker, lying there, on the floor, bleeding, barely conscious, and aware that he's surrounded by a hive enemies. Long story short, when things go very badly, when a seeker actually, due to a random roll, targets a dingo and blows it in half, when the soldier on the floor is taking shots at the seeker drone thingy that's coming in at them, when Max realizes that this soldier is actually fighting the thing that's threatening him, and he manages to tear out of the webbing with a great strength roll. And so he does get hit by the seeker. Actually, the soldier the NPC soldier, because he's the one who's literally threatening the what am I saying? The NPC soldier, who's the one threatening the Seeker, gets hit by it, and he's already so badly wounded that he, in this, going by the damage, is taken to the edge of death. He's dying. So the Seeker has destroyed itself in the explosion, and Max's character, they're covered with blood now, and having a vague idea that this soldier had given his life to protect him. It's not that clear. And frankly, the soldiers still perceive them as enemies of the Hive, but it was the Seeker who was who was the direct danger. And so he picks up the wounded soldier and starts running back to the ship with him. So he rescues him. Meanwhile, of course, Henna's drone has just teleported back, and it's like, okay, that's enough nonsense for me. So they get back, and everybody has an opinion, which is some of the things they've never encountered before, all four of them having opinions. Henna had created for her character last session the ability of mental isolation, because you make up new abilities at the end of each session if you make cleverness rolls. She had made up this ability of mental isolation. So Max's character gets back with this wounded person and is saying, we have got to get back to the Hive. We have got to get, okay, let's go. Let's work together. Let's get back to the Hive and get reintegrated. This is some terrible mistake. This guy thinks we're not part of the Hive. Oh my God, I've rescued him. Let's get back there. And the others, Helma's and Nathan's character, are dead set against it. Like, wait, what? No, we're a Hive, and we've got things to do. Confronted and shocked by confronted by the very concept of disagreement, all three of them look at Henna's character, the drone, who is, remember, this is all telepathic at the moment, who at this point, is like, they're kind of like, and what do you think? And Henna's like, that is not the question this character wants. Rolls for mental isolation and shuts them out. This is more unspeakable confusion on the part of everybody, especially because Henna says her character doesn't really quite grasp that she can do this. She just did it for the first time. So what's even more fun, and this is without my prompting, at some point in there, either before or during this point, somebody had started using speaking and discovered speaking was possible. So it was very interesting that we had to kind of keep a little running look at who was being isolated mentally and who was being, and therefore was broadcasting communications at the same time as who was speaking. So Henna's character was very annoyed that she'd mentally isolated and that these people could still talk to her. And the soldier character at first was, why are these people making all these weird, monkey noises? What are you doing that for? I can understand everybody normally. And then when all this crisscrossing goes on, he switches to talking without knowing it. So there's a really interesting set of things that the players all worked with and started saying, okay, I'm thinking this, I'm saying that. And everybody quickly grasped, okay, so I'm hearing this, but I'm getting these broadcasts from the others. And the dialogue among them is very frenetic and very, very, again, it's got this kind of black comedy effect, but on the other hand, everybody got it, right? Everybody's playing this, and the idea of these characters kind of flailing the stress that they're under while trying to process this. As it happens, they manage to keep the wounded soldier alive, almost miraculously. But they do. So we're left with this somewhat fractured, are we a Hive or not? Who are we? What do we want? Situation. They had managed actually to turn on some of the ancient systems of the ship. It's not operative to fly, but there's some ancient systems, like its ventilation in particular, that were functional, and they actually were able to make it do that. So it is actually a fairly safe place to stay right now. So more info, on the way in the next session for sure. At least I have tons just available for the rolls. All sorts of dangers too. I mean, seekers and dingoes alone is pretty nasty. Who knows what the hive is perceiving about this, if anything, at this point.